أحكي بعض الأشياء قبل ما نبلش المحاضرة. لما الصوت يقطع رجاء نحطه بالشات إنه الصوت مش عم بوضح. وبليز نخلي المايك تبعنا ميوتد، عشان هلا بنقدر احنا نحطكم ميوت، لكن افضل انه انتم تحافظوا عليها ميوتد من عندكم. والشيء الثالث، باخر ربع ساعه راح يكون في عندنا اسئله مفتوحه مع آن اللي هي راح تحكي لنا عن الموضوع تبع الرياده الاجتماعيه وصنع هويه للتغيير والتاثير في الرياده الاجتماعيه. فحتقدروا انكم تحكوا معها بشكل مباشر، سواء من خلال المايك او من خلال ديورنج او خلال المحاضره، من خلال انكم تحطوا الاسئله في الشات. المحاضره راح تكون باللغه الانجليزيه، راح يكون معنا ريم خوري وآن ميلتنبرغ. راح يكون المحاضره باللغه الانجليزيه. راح احاول اني اعمل تلخيص للافكار الرئيسيه باللغه العربيه خلال المحاضره. ما راح تكون ترجمه، ما راح تكون ترجمه حرفيه. في حدا عم بيحكي انه الصوت لا غير مسموع. هل الصوت مسموع مرة أخرى بس؟ أوكي، ما في صوت، ما في صوت. ثواني. ريم
No problem.
سمعتني آن. Can you hear me آن؟
Yes,
Yeah,
we can
مسموع.
hear
أوكي.
you.
أوكي.
But there are two people that have, I think, a problem
أوكي.
with.
اللي عندكم مشكلة بالصوت تأكد إنك حطيت على الميكروفون تبع زوم إنك تقدر تسمع من خلال الميكروفون عشان يشتغل عندك. طيب، فالمحاضرة رح تكون باللغة الإنجليزية والحوار رح يكون باللغة الإنجليزية. رح أحاول أعطي الأفكار الرئيسية باللغة العربية عشان ما نأخذ كثير من وقت المحاضرة، فرح تكون تلخيص لها. طيب، بما إني حكيت كل الملاحظات، بحب تكونوا متحمسين. مين متحمس؟ اللي متحمس يحط رقم 1 مثلا بالشات. يا سلام، في كثير حماس. روعة. رائع. طيب، خليني أبلش بالمحاضرة. بالبداية خليني أقدم عن نفسي. أنا اسمي جميل من شركة جبل عمان ناشرون. جبل عمان ناشرون إحنا بنشتغل في مجال الكتب اللي لها علاقة في مجال التصميم وريادة الأعمال. وأحد الكتب اللي إحنا ألفناها اللي هي ابتكر هوية للتغيير، اللي هو بيتكلم بشكل أساسي عن التغيير في عن الريادة الاجتماعية والتغيير في المجتمع، وكيف نعمل براند قوية اللي يكون لها أثر بأنها توصل لأكبر قدر ممكن من الناس والتأثير الاجتماعي. خلينا أعرف عن ضيوفنا اللي راح يحكوا. المحاضرة اللي هي آن هي مختصة في مجال الهويات اللي بتحدث تغيير اجتماعي. اشتغلت سنوات في وكالات عالمية مرموقة زي استوديو دمبر ووكالة انترباند في أوروبا وجنوب شرق آسيا. فازت كمان آن بعدة جوائز في مجال تطوير العلامات والهويات. وأخيرا أسست آن ذا براندلينج اللي هي في العاصمة الكينية نيروبي، وهي الآن عايشة في كينيا. وهي شركة تعليمية بتعمل على تدريب الرياديين الاجتماعيين لبناء هويات أقوى. وكمان الهدف منها تسريع عملية إحداث التغيير اللي بيحتاجه عالمنا اليوم. آن كمان زي ما حكيت هي مؤلفة لكتاب ابتكار هوية للتغيير أو براند تشينج، وهو أحد منشوراتنا بجبل عمان، وبيحتوي على مخطط التفكير في الهوية، وفيها أكثر من أداة اللي بتساعد آلاف الأشخاص ليبنوا هوية أكبر. وراح يكون في الحوار معنا كمان ريم خوري اللي هي الCEO لشركة وايز والشريك المؤسسة لشركة كامن. ريم كمان عندها شغف تجاه التغيير والتأثير في المجتمع. وشركة وايز اللي هي الCEO تبعتها هي عبارة عن شركة لحلول برمجية لتحليلات تجميع بياناتها وتحليلها في الوقت الفعلي وبالتوافق مع المعايير الدولية وصولا إلى اتخاذ قرارات مبنية على أدلة. بواحد من المحاضرات القديمة، بواحد من الورشات القديمة، وبلشوا صداقتهم من هناك. رح نعرف أكثر عن آن. هلا رح أعطي المايك لآن إنها تحكي أكثر عن حالها وتعرف عن حالها، ورح نكون على تواصل معكم. Anne, please, you have the mic. You can introduce yourself now.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jamil. Hi, everyone. So nice to see you. A really special hangout tonight to spend with all of you, and thanks for hosting me to the publishers team. And I see also Sinan is on the call, which is lovely to see. Yeah, well, so I think Jamil already did a great job introducing me. As he mentioned, I'm currently in Kenya. So if for some reason you see me disappear, we might have a power cut, in which case I'll be back online in just a few seconds. So bear with me. I'm really honored to speak with you tonight because the Arabic edition has been very close to my heart, and it's a story that I haven't been able to share as much as I would like. So this is a really unique opportunity, and I couldn't be more happy to do that with Reem Khouri, who's my friend and colleague and collaborator. And we'll be doing this session together. So I'll lead you through some slides and ask Reem a couple of questions. Reem will ask me some questions so that we build the story together. My Arabic is non-existent. The only reason we have a very honored family tradition of saying yalla yalla whenever someone needs to hurry up, but that's about as far as it goes. So we do have a little bit of translation in case someone appreciates it. So I will hand over the microphone back to Jamil or to Reem in case it's necessary. And if there's anything that you'd love to ask as a follow-up or clarification, you could do so in the chat. I can't see it while I'm presenting, but Reem will just speak up on your behalf. And I'm really looking forward to having some time to also discuss some of these ideas in the Q&A. Cool, so I'll share my screen if that's okay. And then I'll take some time to introduce Reem when we get to the project that we did together. So if all is well, you're seeing a big yellow screen thinking like a brand strategist. Is that correct? I'll take that as a yes. Okay. Yeah, hi everyone. So thinking like a brand strategist is something that is not at the top of the list when people think about skills that are really useful for creating change in the world. But I think it should be, and that's what I'm here tonight to discuss with you. So I'd like to start off on a little bit of a bad note, because there is some bad news, of course, in the world. You all know as well as I do, I'm sure that there's a climate crisis, there's huge youth unemployment, there's unfair trade, overconsumption, growing inequality, overpopulation. And that's the kind of news that generally makes me not want to get out of bed in the morning. But then there's also good news, which is that there's a lot of great people out there in the world who are working on ideas for change, ideas in the space of justice, mobility, healthcare, jobs, education. And those people do want to make me want to get up in the morning and help them get to their goals.
اوكي في البدايه في خبر سيء بدي احكي لكم اياه، انه العالم فيه العديد من المشاكل، من عطاله، من مشاكل بيئيه، مشاكل اكاديميه، ومشاكل صحيه حول العالم اجمع. ولكن ايضا يوجد لدي خبر صار لكم جميعا، انه يوجد اشخاص حول العالم اجمعين يقومون بتحسين الامور في كل مكان في العالم، يقومون في تحسين التعليم ويقومون في تحسين الأمور الصحية، ويعملون ليلا ونهارا لتصبح الأمور بأفضل شكل ممكن. وهذا ما يحمسني للاستيقاظ في الصباح وبدء يوم بكل نشاط للتغيير.
So what is the challenge really? Like if a lot of people are working on solutions, then why aren't we seeing change happen more quickly? So we think that one of the reasons that many of these ideas fail to reach the mainstream is not because they are no good, but because they fail to reach the right audiences at the right volume. And what we see is that as society, we're kind of hardwired to invest this massive amount of resources into the development of great products, but very little time into selling them well to the world. And that we believe that actually what we should be doing is to invest just as much time into selling these ideas and products and services for change to the world as we are in developing the products. Because after all, unless these products get the kind of audience that they deserve, they're not going to make any difference. So if we want these things to succeed, we need to invest in it accordingly.
طب إذا نحن نرى كل هدول الأشخاص يستيقظون صباحا ويعملون من أجل التغيير، لماذا لا نرى التغيير يحدث بسرعة أكبر؟ والإجابة هي ليس لأن المنتجات أو الحلول التي يقومون في إنتاجها سيئة، بل لأنهم يقضون وقت أطول بكثير في عملية تطوير المنتج وإنتاج المنتج، ويقضون وقت قليل جدا في الترويج وتسويق المنتج، لأنهم لا يصلون للأشخاص الصحيحين. فالمشكلة هي ليست في المنتج لكن في الوصول للأشخاص الصحيحين. والمقترح الذي أقوم به هنا هو أن نقسم وقتنا في عملية تطوير المنتج وأيضا في بيع وتسويق المنتج بالتساوي. فعملية إنتاج المنتج وتطويره لا تقل أهمية عن بيع المنتج وتسويقه والوصول فيه للأشخاص المناسبين.
So I would argue that what the world needs is stronger brands for change. And of course, I'm a brand developer, so it's kind of like a car salesman who tells you should get a new car, but there's a story behind it, and I'd love to share that story with you. So as people, we use our brand thinking brains hundreds of times each day. We use them as decision-making options. So I'm just going to see if any of these resonate with you, and I realize these are probably not brands that resonate very much for the Middle East or North Africa. But for instance, when you're thinking about which milk you would buy, you see products on the shelf and you make decisions according to all the associations about the brands that you've built up in your brain in the course of a lifetime. When you think about an important family dinner, whose cooking advice do you take? When you have some money left at the end of the year, would you consider donating it to a charity? And if so, which charity? Or who would you go to make your will? So all these decisions that we encounter in our daily lives, they're often more than not based on brands. And I would say that we are all brand thinkers in that sense. But when we have to reverse engineer that process and we have to build our own brands, that knowledge really only gets us so far.
عفوا كنت عم بحكي والميوت. المقترح اللي الآن بتقدمه هو أن نقدم هوية للتغيير. والشيء الآخر اللي بتقدمه هو أن جميعنا لدينا قدرة معينة للحكم أو التأثير أو التأثر بالبراند. فجميعنا لنا عقلية لها هوية أو لإنشاء الهوية أو لتمييز الهوية. فجميعنا لنا هاي العقلية، جميعنا نفكر في طريقة تؤثر فيها الهوية. واللي قامت فيه الآن هي أنها وضعت مجموعة من براندز معينة من الصور، وحكيت لنا أنت لو كنت بمول معين أو في مكان لشراء المنتج، أي واحد من هذه المنتجات ستشتري، اليمين أو اليسار، ومشيت في أكثر من شيء. وغالبا الجميع اتفق على شيء معين في اختياره لهذا للهوية البصرية المعينة. لذلك الجميع عنده ما تقول أنه الجميع عنده العقلية لإيجاد الهوية المؤثرة أو الأفضل، لكن عندما نعكس الشيء ليصبح أننا نحن المسؤولون عن إنتاج هذه الهوية، هنا يوجد مشكلة. كيف نبني هويتنا الشخصية أو الهوية التي نصل فيها للتأثير كصناع للهوية؟
And can I ask you to just define what you mean by a brand first? Because some people think a brand would be the logo and the way that you look. How do you define brand?
Yeah, great question. So we think of branding as directing how other people think and feel about you. So that means that it's as much about what you say as what you do, because otherwise brand just becomes cosmetic surgery. And I think one of the important things here is that if you think about how you perceive other people, you pick up all those hints about them or about products and services through all these associations that you build in your head over time. So for instance, when I think about you, Reem, I think about talks that I've seen you give. I think about email exchanges we've had, chats, conversations, events that you attend where you speak, and all those interactions build my perception of you. And when you're really good at building brands, you're really good at consciously directing that image that you want to create, and acknowledging it's not just what I say when I'm on the stage, but also what I do in my daily work. So it's walking the talk as well.
واو اتس ا tough one. طيب ريم سألت سؤال، طيب عشان الاشخاص ما يوعوا بمأزق لعدم تمييز ما هي الهوية، لانه بعض الاشخاص بيعتقدوا انه الهوية هي الشعار او اللوجو، لكن باعتقادك او بتعريفك ما هو التعريف الافضل للشعار للهوية؟ والجواب تبع آن الهوية هي الطريقة اللي بنفكر فيها لإيصال الناس لتفكير معين بهذا الشيء أو المنتج أو الشركة، وكيف يشعرون اتجاهها. فهي ليست فقط ما يرونه، لكن هي مزيج من عدة أمور تشتمل على الشعور والتفكير والفعل ما يقوم فيه الشخص عشان اللي يعكس هذه الهوية. فوجود فرضا ريم في هذه المنصة أو كلامها لا يعكس بالضرورة فقط أن هذه هي ريم، لكن ما تقوم به ريم أيضا هو يعكس الهوية لمن هي ريم. وكذلك الشيء ينطبق على المؤسسات أو المنتجات اللي بنقوم فيها، هي ما نوجه به الناس للاعتقاد أو الشعور أو ملاحظة الفعل اللي يدعونا لأخذ إجراء معين اتجاهه. I hope I got it right. So please go ahead.
I will never know. Cool. Thanks, Jamil. So we believe that thinking like a brand strategist can be taught. Everyone already has this foundation of brand thinking that they have built in the course of their life, and now we can build upon that. But before we get into how you teach these skills and what branding is about, I'd just like to share a little bit of my story of how I got there. So my name is Anna Miltenberg. I'm originally from the Netherlands, but I've lived and worked abroad for a big chunk of my life. I graduated as a designer from the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in the Netherlands, and I did that on quite an unusual project. I was really interested in ways that design could advance social change, and I was had already always been an idealistic kid. And so I thought it would be interesting to test my theories. And so I embarked on a graduation research project on HIV/AIDS communication in Mali in Africa. So I worked there for a number of months to support the campaigns, healthcare campaigns for visual illiterates. So those are people who can't read and write, but also can't read and write images. And that was very interesting and really rewarding, but at the same time I was very disillusioned with the development aid space. And so when I got a job offer at a brand agency, I really jumped at the chance.
Lovely. خليني أشارككم بقصة، بما أنه الجميع لديهم القدرة على تعلم كيف أن يفكروا كصناع هوية استراتيجيين. خليني أحكي لكم عن قصتي. أنا درست بالرويال أكاديمي تصميم في هولندا، وأنا كثير كشخص بحب الكمال وبحب الأمور تكون بترتيب كبير. شعرت بأنه بحب الناس كمان بطريقة بصرية إني أثر فيهم. آمنت بالتصميم إنه ممكن يأثر بالأشخاص ويغير في حياتهم، وحبيت أحط هذه التجربة تبعتي أو هذا الاعتقاد ضمن تجربة. عشان هيك أنا رحت بكينيا عشان أعمل بحث عن HIV وأشوف كيف ممكن أساعد في مجال الفيجواليزيشن او الطريقه البصريه لتعليم الاشخاص، لانه هدول الاشخاص ما كانوا معظمهم اللي تعاملت معهم ما كان عندهم لا القدره على القراءه ولا الكتابه ولا حتى فهم هاي الرموز او الاشياء البصريه. لذلك اخذت على عاتقي اني اعمل معهم واحاول من تغيير في حياتهم من خلال التصميم. وايضا ولاحقا جالي جوب اوفر او عرض عمل، بعتذر، عرض عمل في مؤسسة للتصميم، ومن هنا بدأت القصة.
So working in the brand space within agencies was a really interesting leap from where I came from in my education, but I really loved it because it meant that you got to work with people in the commercial space, in the NGO space, cultural space, with all these vastly different types of products and services. And you were allowed to come inside of their organization and see how they did stuff, and then think about the best ways to translate that to the outside world. But after about 12 years, the personal engagement and my ideas of social justice were really starting to bubble up again, and I missed a way to use them in my work. And so I started to think about, well, how could I bring my professional skills in the world of branding with my personal passion and what I think the world needs? How can I bring those together? And so it could have been quite easy to say, just switch to doing consultancy for social enterprises, but I wanted to think a bit bigger. And so I realized that the intersection of these three was this concept of branding for social change. And I went to a leadership program where I met Reem, and she and her classmates really helped me to accelerate these ideas that I had about how branding could help advance some of the issues in the environment and social justice that I deeply care about.
اوكي. في البداية أنا لما أخذت العمل في مؤسسة كان شيء هو كل ما أعرفه، يعني هذا اللي اعتدت عليه وهو الشيء اللي أنا تعلمته، وفعلا كان شيء جميل وكنت أحبه. وكيف أنك أنت تساعد أنك تأخذ الأفكار وتحولها لشيء آخر أكبر وأفضل بشكل عام. ولكن بعد 12 سنة أنا شغفي كان هو مساعدة الناس، وأني أقوم بالارتقاء في المجتمع باستمرار. هذا كل ما كان في بالي، لأنه هذا شغفي، وكان دائما بتفكيري كيف ممكن ما أحب أن أعمله من تصميم يؤثر على ما أحب أن أفعله بحياتي من شغف، وهو التغيير في المجتمع. ومن خلال رحت شاركت في بمؤتمر اللي التقيت فيه مع ريم، وساعدوني هم وتساعدنا معا في ومع الكلاس مع الأشخاص اللي في الصف تبعنا كيف نحول التصميم لأنه يكون يترجم شغفنا لتأثير في المجتمع. وحبيت أفكر فيها بطريقة ممنهجة أضعها أمام آخرين أيضا اللي بيحبوا التغيير في المجتمع، كيف إنه ممكن نجعل التصميم يؤثر في المحيط تبعنا.
And if you think about it, wasn't the program that we attended, wasn't it part of, we all were rebranding our stories? We were 35 people from around the world that have been working in corporations or in governments or in NGOs. And we came to this leadership class almost to rebrand and to find, like, how can I do what I love in a different way, and matching it and aligning it with what the world needs. I think a lot of us shared that intersection.
Yeah, totally. That's a really interesting thought. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Maybe this is a good moment for you, Reem, to share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so when I went to that class, to that program, I had just quit my corporate job, so very similar to you. I had been working with a corporation for 7 years. I loved the work that I did, but I wanted to do things differently. I thought that I wanted to learn new skills, but I also wanted to focus a lot of my efforts on designing intentionally for impact. versus it being, a program or an initiative within a corporation. And so, so I come from the private sector background. I have been disillusioned for the longest time. I always believed that if I wanted to create change, we should be doing it from the private sector point of view, because we have the money and the resources to do so. And I quit my job, started through the program, and you helped me quite a bit into thinking about that, an impact design company. So, and we started actually working with organizations and helping them design for change, right? So how would you use the human-centric design thinking process? How would you measure if you're creating change or not? And that evolved into then creating WISE with my co-founders, because we realized that for you to design change, you need data and you need evidence, and you need to continuously fine-tune what you're creating. أسهل عليك، أنا بدي أرح أترجم. فأنا وأنا تعرفنا على بعض بالبروجرام بأمستردام. كل حدا فينا كان جاي من بيئة مختلفة ومن دول مختلفة وتخصصات مختلفة. كان في منا بيشتغل بالحكومات وبالقطاع الخاص وبالسيفل سوسايتي كمان. أنا كنت بشتغل بشركة لمدة 7 سنين، كنت مبسوطة بالشركة وكنت مرتاحة كتير، بس كان عندي إحساس إني ممكن أقدم أكتر. وزي أن كنت عم بفكر كيف بقدر أستثمر قدراتي بالشغف تبعي بإني فعلاً أحدث تغيير. وأول شركة أسستها كانت شركة لتصميم الأثر، إنه كيف نقدر نصمم الأثر بطريقة تكون financially viable، نقدر نعمل فيها يعني نعمل منها مصاري، بس بنفس الوقت يعني مستدامة، وبنفس الوقت نقدر فعلاً نحدث تغيير ونقيسه. ومن هناك بلش مشواري بالريادة كمان، لأني بلشت شركة تانية هي لقياس الأثر عن طريق التكنولوجيا، عشان نقدر نصمم برامج ومنتجات ومؤسسات يكون فعلاً لها أثر. لازم أول شيء نكون معرفين شو الأثر اللي بدنا نعمله، ولازم نقدر نقيسه عشان نقدر دايماً نطور عليه.
So after meeting Reem, I crafted this creative question that has guided the journey ever since. And I thought that was like asking yourself a question and going on a quest to answer it was a really powerful way, I think, of ensuring that I was constantly pursuing that impact that Reem is also talking about. So I asked myself, how can I help create a world where a family starting a fair trade lemonade brand could actually rival a company like Coca-Cola? And for me, the answer was to train them to think like brand strategists. But I didn't know that for sure. So I went on a 1-year research trip to all these accelerators, incubators, co-working spaces across the world, Ireland, Tunisia, Zambia, Kenya, and tested this idea, like, can we train social entrepreneurs, activists, disruptors at startups? Can we train them to think like brand strategists? And after a year of trying and testing, my answer was like, yes, we can train them, whether it's community workers in informal settlements here in Nairobi or top of the class entrepreneurs in accelerators. All these people have these brand thinking skills inside of them, storytelling skills, and we can activate them using the right type of programs.
وبعد التجربة تبعتي في هذا الليدرشيب كلاس سألت نفسي هذا السؤال وهممت بنفسي لأجد الإجابة عنه، وهو كيف ممكن لمحل عائلة لمناضة إنه ينافس براند عالمي زي كوكاكولا؟ والجواب كان هو إنه ندرب الأشخاص للتفكير كمصمم هوية استراتيجي. وبالفعل بدأت أدرب كيف الأشخاص من العقلية تبعتي من القطاع الخاص واللي تعلمته كمصممة، أدرب أشخاص عندهم الشغف للتأثير الاجتماعي، كيف أنهم يفكروا كمصممين هوية استراتيجيين، ولكن بهدف ليس الربح قدر ما هو بهدف التغيير في المجتمع. وهيك أنا رحت على أكثر من مكان بالعالم، من تونس، نيروبي وغيرهم من الأماكن، عشان أدرب الأشخاص. والنتيجة اللي أنا وجدتها أنه نعم، يمكن أن يتم تدريب أشخاص لهم هذا الشغف أن يفكروا كمصممين هوية استراتيجيين. ومن خلال وبعد سنة من التجربة والتدريبات اقتنعت أنه يجب أن أفعل هذا أكثر مع أشخاص حول العالم.
Thanks, Jamil. Reem, so this is where you come back into the picture. So while we were testing these ideas and trying out new tools, Reem actually saw one of the core tools from the methodology that I developed, and got an idea for how else they could be used. Maybe you want to tell a little bit about that project, Reem.
Yes. So we actually had, it was fascinating because we were some of the people that you tested on your tool, right? And it was so eye-opening to us that at the same time, we're working on a project in Saudi about the integration of women in the retail sector, in the workforce. And you had a lot of investments that had happened in Saudi in training these women. And people kept telling us it's, the problem is not training, the problem is it's cultural. People don't want to work. The Arab world doesn't want to work, right? And I kept thinking, and that can't be the reason, that's not how we're born. And then I had a discussion with you, we were a group, and we had a discussion together of, can we actually use these tools not just for the company, but also for individuals to figure out who they are, what do they want, what do they need to get there? And we tested it, and the results were amazing. And so with that particular program, because we asked the question of who are you and what do you want and what are your values, and what you need to do to get to where you want, and we used your principles and applied them, we managed to lower the turnover rate for women that we worked with from 85% to 0, and the absenteeism rate from 95% to below 9%. And so that was actually a fantastic result of using your tools. And so maybe I'll take it in Arabic very quickly. واحدة من الطرق اللي هلا أنا واحدة من الناس اللي جربت عليها أنا التول كيت تبعتها، فكنت مبلشة أشتغل على مشروع بالسعودية، وتناقشنا مع آن إنه كيف نقدر نستخدم هاي التول مش بس لمؤسسات ولكن كمان لأفراد. والمشروع بالسعودية كان على إدماج السيدات السعوديات في سوق العمل، في especially بالريتيل سيكتور. وكان كتير عم بيجينا، طبعا كان في استثمارات كتير عم بتصير بالتدريب والى اخره، لكن دائما بيقولوا لنا انه المشكله هي ثقافيه، المشكله مش شيء ثاني. طبعا بنسمع هذا الحكي بالاردن، بنسمع في العالم العربي كله انه الناس ما بدها تشتغل. ولكن حقيقه الامر لما استخدمنا الادوات اللي اعطتنا اياهم الان، اللي هي فعلا لنعرف هويتنا، لنعرف مين احنا وايش بدنا وكيف نخطط للي احنا بدنا نروح عليه وايش القيم تبعتنا، قدرنا مع الستات اللي اشتغلنا معهم انه ننزل نسبة الغياب من 95% لتحت 9%، وقدرنا انه ننزل نسبة السيدات اللي بيتركوا العمل من 85% ل0. فهاي كانت نتيجة رائعة لكيف استخدمنا الأدوات تبعت آن مش بس على مستوى المؤسسي ولكن كمان على مستوى الأفراد. فهاي كان من الشغل اللي اشتغلناه مع بعض. Back to you.
Yeah, well, it brings back a lot of memories because it was a very special project for me. I think personal branding has is of course a bit of a hype at the moment, and I think we tend to think about it as making ourselves much look much better than we really are. But what we discovered through this project for me was that if you're able to ask people, like, take some time to think about, like, what do you want your life to look like, or what do you want the world to look like, and how can you get there, and what are the values that you're going to base your decisions on, and what are you going to commit to deliver, and who needs to know about this? So for instance, your future employers, and how can you position yourself in such a way that you are the person of choice for that particular role. Asking people to take time for those questions is a really important moment, because we don't get so much time for that in our lives in general, to like stand still and look at the big picture. So this ability for women to create this compass for themselves was really an eye-opening project for me, and yeah, very close to my heart.
Yeah, and I remember, and I think one of the things I remember very clearly about that project is also when the first time we asked, "Who are you?" They had a hard time answering that question. It's not, it's like, who are you? What do you want out of life? And that was because we sometimes forget to ask ourselves these questions, and we live up to the expectation of everyone else around us versus thinking, what is the change that I want to create for myself and for my life? It was extremely emotional to go through that, I remember.
Yeah, there was the moment where we were doing the prototypes, and I was getting, of course, the participants' answers translated to me, but I kept tearing up because people would say things like, "No one's ever asked me what I wanted to do with my life before," and just, when you hear people express that, yeah, it's just, yeah, it was a powerful moment.
Yeah. عم نحكي على الفترة اللي اشتغلنا فيها لما كنا نجرب هاي الأداة مع السيدات اللي كنا عم نشتغل معهم. واحدة من أصعب الأشياء كانت، بس كمان من أكثر الأشياء اللي أعطتنا ثراء، كان ردة فعل السيدات اللي اشتغلنا معهم. لأنه لما بنسأل مين أنتِ وإيش بدك من الحياة، وإيش الأشياء اللي لازم تعمليها عشان توصلي لهاي الشغلة، وشو القيم اللي بدك تمشي عليها، ولا مين بدك تحكي، مع مين بدك تحكي، ولا مين بدك تخبري إنه هاي التغييرات بدها تصير. كانت أسئلة كتير عميقة، وفي منهم كانوا يقولوا لنا أنا عمره ما حدا سألني إيش بدي، ولا عمره حدا سألني مين أنتي. وإحنا طبعاً في كتير أحياناً بحياتنا حتى لو عندي جواب عن هذا السؤال بننسى. بيصير إنه أنا بعيش أو بشتغل كل يوم لإرضاء الغير أو لإحداث التغيير اللي غيري بده إياه، بدل ما أفكر بشو التغيير اللي أنا بدي أعمله، وعشان أعمل هذا التغيير مين الناس اللي لازم يكونوا حوالي، إيش الأشياء اللي لازم أتعلمها، إيش المصطلحات اللي لازم أستخدمها، إيش العلاقات اللي لازم أكونها، والأدوات اللي محتاجها، وإيش كيف بقدر أعبر عن حالي وأعبر عن هذا التغيير. فهذا كله كان جزء من الشغل اللي اشتغلناه مع بعض.
So back on the road, after doing this spectacular project, I was again training mostly organizations and starting entrepreneurs, and thinking about, okay, well, what is all of the knowledge that people need to get their brand off the ground? And every workshop I did, we heard repeating questions. What's the anatomy of a brand? How do I pick a good name? What are the steps to follow? How does my marketing strategy or my communication strategy, how does it fit into the brand? So I decided, this canvas that we created isn't enough, so we need a full book. And at that point, I decided to get the troops together. So I was really lucky to be able to crowdfund the initial edition of Brand the Change. And that really would not have been possible without Reem, another Reem in Tunisia, Rima in Saudi Arabia, and Sabine in Dubai, who all really supported me with that campaign and helped me get the word out and provided financial support. So this is the little known story. So behind the Arabic edition is actually the English edition funded by Arab entrepreneurs. And the book really grew out into a movement. So many more people came on board. We started building a community of social entrepreneurs, business people, brand professionals, and started to grow across the world. And I had always had this dream that we were going to be able to offer this book also in different languages. And again, Reem came to the rescue and connected me to Sinan at JA Publishers and enabled us to create the Arabic edition. So one of the things that's been really remarkable about the journey is that you can have a book that's kind of this very static thing, static object, really turn into something that can offer lots of resources for lots of people, but also bring them together. So we have an online community, we do physical events and online events, we have training sessions, we have meetups and debates. Lots of different tools and resources have come out since. And so it's really this work in progress that keeps continuing.
ومن خلال التدريبات كنت بسأل دائما، كان بيجي لي أسئلة، طب شو هي الأشياء أو المعارف اللي لازم أحصل عليها عشان نتعلم نفكر كمصممين هوية استراتيجيين. ومن أهم الأسئلة مثلا إيش أسميها أو كيف أصممها، طب شو الألوان، طب كيف أوصل فيها للآخرين. من هون اكتشفت إنه المخطط أو الكانفاس اللي هلأ رح ندخل في تفاصيله أكثر ما كان كافي فقط لإجابة كل هاي الأسئلة، كانت تول ممتازة لكن غير كافية. ومن هون بلش مشروع ثاني اللي هو مشروع الكتاب، اللي هو بيحتوي على كثير من الأدوات اللي بتساعد الأشخاص الرياديين والمصممين إنهم يجدوا أجوبة على هاي الأسئلة. وحاولت أوصل لكثير أشخاص، وهون أيضا ريم ساعدتني إني أتواصل مع سنان السويس لأنه نقدر نعمله، اللي هو مدير شركة جبل عمان ناشرون، عشان نقدر نعمله باللغة العربية. وما وقف الموضوع عند هذه النقطة، لكن أيضا الأشخاص اللي تأثروا بالكتاب وبالدورات التدريبية بلش يطلع منهم مبادرات لعمل مجتمع خاص بالرياديين الاجتماعيين. كمان شوي رح أشارك رابط على الشات للكوميونتي أو المجتمع الخاص بالأشخاص الرياديين الاجتماعيين والمصممين للتغيير، اللي هم ثابروا عبر السنين انهم يشاركوا خبراتهم ويشاركوا تصميماتهم ويكونوا على تواصل مع بعض، يشجعوا بعض ويقدروا انه يشوفوا فيها التطورات اللي بتصير. ومن هون كمان بدأنا انه نفكر اكثر بانه نوصل من خلال ترجمات غير اللغة الانجليزية والعربية، وهذا اللي عم نشتغل فيه عشان نقدر نوصل لاكبر قدر ممكن من الناس.
So what's in the book? We do a couple of really important things that I think didn't exist in any book that I could find, at least. So the first thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to demystify this brand process. So all the books on branding that I'd read were really inspiring and really amazing, but they didn't really teach me how to do it myself. And so a lot of the examples were of these major, companies like Apple and Coca-Cola that existed for decades, that had massive marketing budgets, and I felt those were not actually useful examples. So we started to unpack the brand development process. So the sensing process, where you gather all the insights and information that you need to build the brand, do your research, and then the phase where you think like a brand strategist in order to make your concept tangible and to bring it to life. Then the brand making process, where you start to build the identity and the different elements that you need in order to take it live. And then last, the brand building phase, which is this ongoing phase, which actually never ends, of living the brand, so really bringing it to life through all the different actions and communications that you create.
وهون أنا بلشت أفكر، طيب كيف ممكن نشرح، كيف ممكن إنه نصنع هاي الهوية؟ والجواب كان هو بتشريح المفهوم للهوية. بعد ما بحثت بكثير من الكتب اللي بتحكي عن موضوع الهوية، وجدت إنها كلها كتب محمسة وكتب فيها نوع من الإلهام، لكن هل هي مناسبة لصنع هويتي الشخصية أو الهوية الخاصة في كمؤسسة اجتماعية أو للتأثير الاجتماعي؟ والجواب كان لا، لازم أنا أبلش بالتشريح، وبعد بحث طويل قدرت أصل للشيء اللي أمامنا هون، للمرحلة اللي قدامنا في الشاشة هون. وأول خطوة هي كانت الاستشعار، اللي بنجمع فيها المعلومات والرؤى والأفكار الملهمة اللي بنحتاجها لتطوير الهوية. وثاني نقطة كانت كيف نفكر في الهوية، وهون اللي كنا بنحكي عنه تفكير كمصمم هوية استراتيجي، وهون بيطور التفكير في الهوية أفكار إبداعية والطريقة اللي بدنا نعرف فيها هويتنا والإصغاء والهوية. طبعا رح ندخل هلأ بتفاصيل أكثر لكل واحدة من هدول. والنقطة الثالثة كانت صناعة الهوية، هون بلشنا بصناعة الهوية، وهون بتعمل على صناعة على تحويل تلك هاي الرؤى والأفكار لوسائل تعبيرية في العالم الحقيقي، وهون تطوير واجهة وصوت ومواد للتواصل وخبرات ومزيد من أجل إطلاق رائع للهوية. وآخر نقطة بعد صناعة الهوية هو بناء الهوية، وبناء الهوية هو العملية المستمرة الاستدامة لتطوير الأساليب الجديدة للتفاعل مع الجمهور وانتشار سمعتك وتحفيز تأثيرك.
Thanks, Jamil. I think Reem, you had a question for me about this.
So I was wondering, what should we know that these are things we need to include and think about. What should we not include?
Well, I think that question really hints at this issue of how do you define brand, because it's really hard to understand, like, where does it start and where does brand stop. So we think of brand really as kind of the core frame that the business operations are built on. So for instance, like brand sets values that you base your decision making on, your behavior. And that might, for instance, govern your HR policy or your logistics through your supply chain. But you don't actually, like, your brand doesn't run the logistics or doesn't actually implement the HR policy. So it's really kind of a thinking process that guides things. And traditionally it sits in a brand or communication department, but I would really like to think as an entire team owning the brand and implementing that across all the different interactions. So across HR and operations and all the products and services. So not as one silo out of 6 different pillars of activities, but really as driving them. And then of course you have the conventional aspects of, for instance, advertising, communication, marketing, that could be part of a kind of brand department, but that are more the, let's say, the execution branch of the communication side. And I would like to see that change a little bit. So brand not just to be in that little silo, but outside of it. So within brand, if you can follow that kind of direction of directing how other people think and feel about you, then yes, see your advertising and your marketing and your communications as part of it, and all the ways that you live the brand as well. But for instance, be careful when you think about it, for instance, purely as PR efforts and not actually walking your talk.
I mean, one of the things that actually really attracted me to your way of thinking about brands and that converted me is that the depth, right? So we think almost the brand is the identity, and how can we reflect it in all aspects of the business, right? And so how I communicate, how I look, how I hire, how I do my operations. And so I think that's, to me, what it includes is the identity of the organization, but then you have to reflect it across all of your operations and departments. سألت آن إيش اللي إحنا لازم نحطه، إيش اللي ما لازم يكون جزء من البراند أو الهوية. هي بتقول إنه إحنا نفكر دائما بهوية المؤسسية كهي الكور، هي النواة، وبعدين كيف بقدر أعمل ريفلكشن لهذه الهوية على بالكوميونيكيشنز تبعتي، بالتواصل، بطريقة العمل، كيف عم بقى بالبروكيرمنت بوليسيز، بكل البوليسيز اللي أنا بعملها كشركة، بالعمليات، حتى الموارد البشرية، كيف مين عم بجيب يشتغل معي إلى آخره. فإحنا لازم نفكر بالبراند إنها هي الهوية المؤسسية، ولكن مش نفكر فيها إنها public relations أو marketing. هي الهوية المؤسسية، وبعدين كيف أنا بستعمل هاي الهوية المؤسسية من أجل التواصل، ومن أجل الماركتينج، ومن أجل الببليك ريليشنز، ومن أجل إدارة الموارد وإلى آخره.
To speak to your point, Reem, of it being a bit of a difference, a little bit of a deeper concept, I have a slide that I think you might appreciate. So we really like to think of the anatomy of a brand as in the same way as the anatomy of a person. So you have a core, your values, your beliefs, your idea of what's right for the world, and that really drives everything that you say and that you do. And then you have your, like, let's say the superficial surface, so your identity, so the way that you express what you stand for to the outside world. And as humans, we do that sometimes through our clothes, but we also do it through our voice, and other ways that people can see on the outside what is really on the inside. And then there is a kind of third layer where all the interactions between you and the outside world happen. And those interactions are what is going to drive people's perception of you. And we use this kind of idea of thinking of brand anatomy as a human model as the cornerstone of the method that we teach. So this is also the core tool in the book. And I'll just go through a few of the basic principles with you guys. So the core of the brand is really is all about the purpose. So what's the world that you want to see? How are you going to get there? What are the values that will drive your behavior? What are you committing to deliver? So getting really, really sharp, as if you're proposing marriage to someone, like these are the things that I promise that I commit to. And then you go and you think about, okay, well, how does that translate to identity? So not identity as something that's just slabbed on, not related to the inside, but really corresponding. So what is my visual identity? What do I look like? And then the verbal identity, what do I sound like? How do I talk? And really building an identity and a personality there. And then the final ring, all of the brand interactions. So those are, for instance, products and service. So exactly the interaction people have with your actual product and service will decide whether they like it or not, and will define really their relationship with you. So if you think about the last time you bought something online and you got incredible customer service or really bad service, like how, by which brand core was that driven, and did someone do a bad job of building this great reputation with you? When we think of the places and events where we can encounter a brand, if you really have a strong purpose, you'll have a much clearer idea of where you need to be seen. Who do you want to be seen with? So whether you're going to have your headquarters, for instance, in Dubai versus Nairobi is something that really reflects about who you are as an organization or as a person on the inside. Then communication and channels. Of course, we know that there's lots of social media channels that you have at your disposal, but how are you actually going to use them? Like, how are you going to use them to tie people in? What are the partnerships and collaborations that you can build that really lift your brand up? What are the people that you put in the spotlight for your brand? And what's the technology that you can leverage for it? And when you use this model to brainstorm your own brands, you can get really interesting insights into all the different ways that people can perceive you on the outside in the way that is going to help you to achieve your goals. And I think this model of everything that's in the book is the most powerful tool, I think, that we have to help people direct how they think and feel.
I have a question. So when I started Wise, I actually used that tool, right? So as a startup, right, as a tiny organization, before even having the product being ready, I needed
Yeah.
to figure out the core and the vision and the values, and even and to us it was actually very important to do it very early on with the core team, so that it also became, when we wanted to hire new people, and as the team grew, that we are aligned, that there's a culture fit with us based on, the brand, the core of the brand and the values and the vision. My question, and then as we develop the product, you develop your offerings and your services and your products, you look at everything else. I'll tell you from now, our website does not reflect us, right? So we still need to work on the reflection of all of this everywhere. But my question to you is, which one of those affect the credibility of an organization? We see a lot of organizations that say, we are for gender equality, we do this, but then in practice, it's not necessarily there. How do we think about these elements and their link to credibility?
I think people are really smart in having a radar, like I always call it the bullshit radar. I think inherently just want to see people walk their talk. So when you're indeed like talking about, for instance, something like gender equality, but people see that the way that you treat your team, for instance, isn't right, it's not going to result in believability. So I actually think that the way that these elements correspond between the inside and the outside are really relevant, because they're going to set people's bullshit radar off. And I don't think that in 2021, a lot of people are going to fall for those kinds of cosmetic operations anymore. And actually, it's quite interesting, because people tend to think that this happens more in the commercial space, but we see that in any type of space, also the impact space. We know, I don't know if there's a lot of impact professionals in this audience, but I'm sure we all know one or two people who work in the development space and are themselves as humans very undercompensated or not treated fairly. And so I think these things in 2021 really need to be aligned. And so making sure that the core of what you're all about actually aligns with the outside is really important there. And continuously, whether you're in an early stage like you, Reem, and then as you grow, just looking at that canvas again, like let's say every 6 months, and tuning it and making sure that you're still on top of everything, I think would be
So definitely there's that, but there's another part that we are doing the work, but we don't have the time to communicate it, which is the financial, like the endless story of startups and social entrepreneurs, where they're too focused on the work and they're not communicating. But because we're not communicating it, we're losing on so many opportunities, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the other side. That's where we have an issue. But let me just sum it up very quickly. So عن سألت عن هلا هي ورجتنا هاي من أهم الأدوات اللي موجودة بالكتاب، وهو احنا بنطلع عليها، يعني هي ورجت قبل إنه احنا بنطلع عليها كمان زي جسم الإنسان، في الجوهر وفي الهوية وبعدين في التعامل مع الخارج. فهي بتطلع على الهوية المؤسسية بنفس الطريقة، شو جوهر الهوية، شو الرؤية، شو القيم، شو الرسالة اللي عم نحاول نعملها. بعدين وعود الهوية براند بروميس، يعني حتى آن لما بتحكي على هاي أول جزئيتين بتقول زي لما بنيجي بدنا نتجوز، من إيش الأشياء الأساسيات اللي بدنا نكون متفقين عليها. وبعدين بينعكس هذا الحكي على الهوية البصرية، إنه كيف بده يكون شكلي، كيف بده يكون شكل الويب سايت، كيف بده يكون شكل المنتج، وكمان على الهوية الهوية البصرية والهوية I'm trying to look I think الهوية المرئية. بعدين عنا اللفظية، فهي الكوميونيكيشن، إنه إيش الكلمات اللي بدي أستخدمها، إيش المصطلحات اللي بنستخدمها. وبعدين كيف بينعكس هذا الحكي على التواصل وقنوات الاتصال، على الشراكات اللي لازم نأسسها، على الأشخاص والمواهب والسلوك اللي لازم يكون موجود حوالينا، وعلى الأماكن والفعاليات اللي لازم نعملها، وعلى المنتجات والخدمات اللي بنقدمها، وعلى التكنولوجيا اللي عم نستخدمها. سألت عن إيش أكتر شيء بيأثر على الكريديبيليتي تبعتنا، هل انه حدا يجي يصدق انه احنا بنشتغل، انه احنا عم نعمل الحكي اللي عم نقوله ولا لا. وكان جوابها انه احنا بال 2021 بيكون كتير واضح اليوم، بهاي الايام كتير واضح بالنسبه لنا لما يكون بنحكي شيء ولكن نفعل شيء ثاني. واحدة من الاشياء اللي احنا استخدمنا هاي الاداة باول تاسيس للشركه تبعتنا، فهي احنا مش لازم يكون شركه مؤسسه وشركه كبيره، هي الادوات اللي عملتها آن هي كمان للشركات الناشئه او حتى في قيد التاسيس. لما بلشنا بجوهر الهويه والرؤيه والقيم والرساله، قدرنا نعرف مين اول شيء، كيف ايش المنتج اللي بدنا نبنيه، قدرنا نعرف كيف بدنا نتعامل مع الزباين، قدرنا من خلال هذا الجوهر نعرف كمان شو نوع الاشخاص اللي بدنا يكونوا بيشتغلوا معنا، وشو نوع الكلاينتس اللي بدنا نشتغل معهم، او الزباين اللي بدنا نشتغل معهم. فهي مش إشي احنا لازم نكون اوريدي مؤسسين عشان نقدر نستخدمه. وآن بتقول انه لما نكون شركه ناشئه او شركه صغيره لسه باول ايامها، او يعني عمرنا سنتين بس لساتنا اطفال بعمر الشركات، انه نضلنا نتطلع على هاي الاداه كل 6 اشهر، فنرجع نراجعها بعد 6 اشهر، ونرجع نراجعها مع التيم بعد 6 اشهر عشان نقدر نطورها مع تطور الشركه. Go ahead, Anne.
Thanks, Reem. One of the other elements of the book that I really think is incredibly important are the case studies. So as people, we tend to learn from examples. So I really wanted to have a book that was rich in experiences of entrepreneurs themselves, because a lot of the books that we see about branding, they actually mostly are written by people in agencies and not the people who are doing the ongoing work themselves. So we speak to, for instance, Tony Chocolonely, which is a booming fair trade chocolate brand from the Netherlands, or Dr. Ayana Johnson, who's a marine biologist and was just actually last week nominated for the Time 100 Next list of change makers to follow. And another thing that was important about case studies, I didn't want all of them to come from the US. So for the English edition, we really tried hard to get examples of these brands from across Africa, Asia, Europe, North and South America. And it was a challenge because I think in general, we see that most of the case studies regarding brand have been documented in English. Of course, I'm limited myself in the languages that I speak in terms of doing the research. So we'd reached out several people in the network in order to find those cases. And so when we started working with Jabal Aman on the Arabic edition, we were able to actually create 2 localized case studies. So we talked to the team at Zain about the co-working space, and we were able to document the case of a lawyer in KSA, and that really was another one of those aspects of something that was close to my heart that we were able to put into this edition.
And maybe we sum it up first before I ask you my question. أنا عم تحكي إنه من أهم الأشياء اللي انحطت بالكتاب هي أمثلة وكيس ستاديز من العالم ومن السيكتورز مختلفة، ومن مناطق مختلفة بالعالم. ولكن لما اجت بلشت تشتغل كمان على النسخة العربية من الكتاب، كان بيهمها إنه تحط كيس ستاديز من العالم العربي كمان. فأنا هلأ عم بدي أسألها سؤال إنه ليه أهمية شكرا، حدا بيقول لي قطاعات، ضليتني أقول سيكتورز معلقة. ثانك يو منير. فواحد من الأسئلة اللي عندها ليه أهمية إنه يكون عندها case studies وأمثلة من العالم العربي. And one of the questions, I summed up what you said without going too much into the details, but one of the questions I know why case studies from the region were important to me. But I would like to ask you why they were important to you. And then I'll tell you why they were important to me.
Well, so coming from the Netherlands, which is of course in Europe, but is not a dominantly English-speaking country, what you notice is that the kind of enormous cultural shift towards this kind of global Silicon Valley attitude is really it's annihilating a lot of local cultures, but I think it's also setting one cultural norm of how we should all think and behave. And what I see is that like there's opportunities to create amazing brands everywhere. There's talent everywhere, but there's not access to information and access to skill building everywhere. And I really think it's important that amazing work that's being done in the Middle East and in North Africa is being showcased to the world. And so I hope that for instance, in the next edition of the English version, we can actually bring some of those localized cases back into global circulation as well, so that the knowledge comes both ways and isn't just American culture moving to the rest of the world, but also opening up, for instance, some of the amazing case studies we have here in Kenya, and Kenya having, not always the best reputation abroad because people know so little about it. So to be able to advance this kind of idea of kind of social justice and how nations and people are perceived through these case studies, is for me a really an added bonus to being able to do this work.
Yeah, for me, it's 100% agreed. What I would think of is, in addition to that, is relevance, right? Sometimes we need case studies from the region because some of the social justice issues that you want to work on is, the risk that you're taking, the way that you communicate it, the solution that you're providing would be very different being in the Arab world versus a European country or the US or in Africa, right? So I think that this is, to me, it's actually the diversity of problem solving and addressing, and even if it's the same issue. But to me, that was extremely important, especially that sometimes people feel, I don't know if I want to say they lose hope, but they say, yeah, of course it worked in the US because they have that legislation, or because, I remember even from a startup point of view, when you say seed round, you're talking millions in the US. When you're talking seed round in Jordan, you're talking, $100,000 to $100,000. And so everything, the scale is different. The legislation is different, but also I think that we need more and more stories of people that are facing very similar issues and how they address them versus saying, I'm not going to address it because I might end up going to jail. I found a lot of really interesting case studies of people working towards social justice issues that are extremely sensitive, but they found a very innovative and impactful way to communicate it and to approach it. And I think that's extremely valuable.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really, really extremely important point. And I mean, you see this also everywhere, like people are not represented in a lot of the stories that are being told. And so we do have to have the courage sometimes to also allow ourselves to be represented. So we often have quite a few challenges in getting people to open up about this process. So not everyone is, every organization or every person is willing to have themselves analyzed in this way. So in this case, for instance, I think the personal branding case from KSA from Sofana that we were able to document, I thought that was a courageous decision on her part as well. And I think that diversity question, it's something that you don't hear a lot. I feel like the 90s were a moment, and maybe this was just in Europe, but the 90s were a moment where diversity was very popular. And when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, it was just kind of the expectation that society was going to get more diverse and we're going to be more accepting. And what we're seeing right now is, or in the past, I guess, 20 years almost already, is such a movement the other direction. And so the ability to bring people together around these shared concepts has been, yeah, super meaningful to me. And also to see all of those people being accepted as peers within a community. So everyone brings their own value and their own talent and skill and perspective together. And that's a really beautiful thing. I'm curious, Wim, what do you think is important for brands in the region?
For the brands in the region, for social entrepreneurs, I think we have a big pitfall when it comes to thinking that because we're working on an amazing mission, we don't need to dig deeper on how do we, explaining the model and explaining of how it works and explaining the values, and as you mentioned, so you gave an amazing example of saying we all know one or two people that are working in the social impact space and they're underpaid and so I think that's definitely something that we need support with. And I think it's more than just the branding part. I think that today the capital flow that exists is more about ideas versus transforming your organization. And I think that what we really need is support and funds to think about how can we fund that transformation for change. And I think that a lot of funds are not looking at that, right? So even when they give you money and they believe in your idea and it's an impact fund and everything, if you say I'm going to spend 50% of that amount to actually change the way I, pay my employees, etc., they're going to start raising red flags. But I think this is a global thing, by the way. I don't necessarily think this is just for the region. I think a lot of the globally, I think that this transformation type of funding transformation is very much needed. In the region, I think that we also should, I think that we have amazing stories. We have amazing social entrepreneurs. I've met people that are really creating change in Egypt, in Saudi, in Tunisia, in Morocco, in Jordan, in Palestine, and we're not hearing their stories. When you meet them, you're hearing, right? But I think it's that storytelling, it's that articulation, and I hope the book helps with that.
Thanks. That's really, yeah, for me, of course, being an outsider, it's really interesting to hear all the details of some of the details of what's going on. And I empathize on the finance issue in Kenya. Setting up a bank account is like not is not a picnic. Jamila, I think we're at the end of our time, but I hope we still have a little bit of time for Q&A.
Yes, I think we do have 10 minutes to receive some questions from the audience. طيب راح يكون معنا وقت 10 دقائق تقريبا للي بده يسأل. بليز حط سؤالك او بعرفش اذا هون في raise hand. I don't think اوكي
في بالرياكشنز بتقدر
اوكي بالرياكشنز اللي عنده سؤال بليز انه
هي
صهيب يس صهيب جو اهيد تقدر تشيل الميوت عنك.
Suhaib. Okay, next was Nusayba. Okay.
الو
ايوه
انا عندي سؤال. كيف ممكن المصمم يطور نفسه في الهويات البصريه عن طريق القراءه او عن طريق الممارسه؟ ممكن افادي على سؤالي.
اوكي شكرا. ريم بتحبي أنت تترجمي ولا؟
And the first question was, how can we improve the visual identity? How can we, what kind of training skills, reading, what can we do to improve? Let's take a couple of other questions and then you can answer. I think we had Nusayba next, and then Munir, and then Ruwaina and Ibrahim.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
How are you? How everyone? I want to ask, can I specialize in design visual identity?
Okay, we'll get back to you on that. Then it's Munir.
مساء الخير مس ريم وجبل عمان ببلشر. مساء الخير مس آن. يعني أنا سؤالي يعني إلى أي مدى يمكن إنه الهوية تتأثر بالقيم الخاصة بالمجتمعات، خصوصاً إنه في مجتمعاتنا عندنا بالشرق الأوسط يعني نوعاً ما في نوع من يعني الاختلاف في الهويات ويعني بعض الأيديولوجيات المختلفة. هل تؤثر هذه في صناعة هوية يعني المنتج أو في صناعة، يعني خصوصاً إذا كان المستهدف أكثر من فئة أو أكثر من قطاع؟ وشكراً.
Shukran, Munir. That's a very interesting question. And the question is, how much is the brand or the identity is influenced by society values and society ideologies? Because you have so many different identities within society. So how much does it influence your own identity? Then we have Ruwaina and Ruwaina, Ibrahim, and then Fawaz. صح?
Hi.
Hi.
I am a graphic designer who's a beginner. I just wanted to ask, how can I convince my client to do a whole brand strategy and a whole brand identity when they just asking me for a logo and a pattern?
Very good question. Yes. So how can we convince them? Okay. And then we have Fawaz and then Ibrahim, right? Or the other way around. Sorry. Fawaz?
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, I can see the book as a framework of doing an identity or changing an identity, and it's a challenge that we are facing in building a brand or identity for any let's say a project. And yes, there is multiple framework that out there and the web, and many people is using let's say different kind of framework. So I'm just wondering about the book is there will be, let's say, a version 2 of this book or let's say trying to find another way of developing this framework that you built so far in the book. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Ibrahim, and then Jamal, and then we'll let Anne answer. Ibrahim.
السلام عليكم جميعا. أهلين ريم، كيفك؟
أهلا.
كيف ممكن نعمل امباكت او ستوري حلوه حتى لو احنا شركه ربحيه؟ يعني شركه ممكن تكون غاياتها للربح. مثلا كيس ستدي، انا قاعد باسس شركه خاصه بالماتش ميكينج بين الايفنت اورجانيزر والسبونسر شيب البراند. كيف ممكن اعكس السوشيال امباكت على هذا المشروع أو على أي مشروع قد يكون تجاري أو ربحي؟ وشكرا.
مش عارفة هذا إلي ولا لا السؤال. And this question is, how can I work on social impact when I am a fully for-profit, like a corporate type? So how do I think about telling the story of impact? My answer was, I'm not sure how much the question was for me versus you, but we can both answer.
You can take it, Reem. You're welcome to take it.
جمال وزينب.
السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام.
هو اقتراح فقط إلى زيادة التول كيت إلى أنها تكون مفصلة أكثر. طبعا هذه جنرال براندنج للهويات بالعموم، لكن أقترح أنه يكون في تقسيم للتول كيتس، يكون في البيرسونال براند لها تول كيت خاصة، والكوميرشال لها تول خاصة، والسوشيال براندنج برضو لها تول خاصة. هذا اقتراح لزيادة الكتاب يعني الطبع الثاني.
So this is actually not a question, but a feedback you can respond to is actually to further break down the toolkit or further evolve the toolkit into a personal branding toolkit book versus a commercial branding toolkit book versus a social enterprise or a social, change makers toolkit. Zainab, and then we'll start answering.
سلام.
أهلاً، عليكم السلام.
بدي أسأل شو هي الصفات أو الكاركترستكس اللي بتنافس عليها الشركات مثلا، أو شو هي الأشياء الأساسية أو الأشياء اللي مثلا تجذب العالم كنظريا يعني، وكيف أو وين فينا نلاقي مثلا في بوكس أو في مثلا مواقع معينة مثلا نقدر نعرف هالقصص. عرفت علي السؤال؟
سؤال what are the characteristics that companies compete on, right? So what are the brand values or brand elements that we see a lot of companies competing on? And والجزء الثاني من السؤال إنه where can we find resources about these topics? يعني مثلا it depends، يعني بديش أجاوب on behalf of fan، بس it depends on the time, right? So today in the US, everyone is competing on gender equality and diversity because of what's happening. But that could change tomorrow. As yesterday, everyone was competing about COVID-19 relief. So إذا بتقدري تساعدينا أكثر the types of resources اللي عم تطلعي عليها. أنت بدك إنه وين إيش الويب سايتس اللي محل ما بقدر ألاقي معلومات أكثر شيء؟
إيه مزبوط، أو البوكس مثلا.
Yeah. So recommendations of resources and books and websites of where to find about branding. Okay, so if I'm going to summarize how to train and what do we need to work on to improve visual identity, can I specialize in brand design and brand strategy? Would my organizational identity be influenced by societal values and ideologies? How do I convince organizations that I need to work with them on a brand strategy versus a logo? And then in relation to your toolkit in specific, would there be a version 2? Would there be multiple toolkits for multiple purposes? And when I'm purely for-profit organization, how do I think about impact and tell the story of impact?
I've written them down so that I can remember what I'm going to answer. Cool. So this question of how we can improve identity, I think that's a super interesting one, because I've worked as a teacher design teacher in Italy and Korea, for instance. And where I'm from in the Netherlands, we have quite a long history of graphic design, especially focused on visual identity for branding. And it was something that was highly encouraged by the government and received a lot of recognition. And so it seeped into the culture, which created, let's say, a high benchmark for quality. And then that quality itself, by people being exposed to it, just keeps on growing, which is why I think Dutch design has quite a good reputation worldwide. And so that also immediately becomes a little bit of the issue, because I think the standard quality of identity work is really the result of a kind of ecosystem that every location is building. And so you need young talent, you need people who are able to teach it, you need a good balance between, let's say, examples from across the world as well as local visual vernacular. And building that ecosystem isn't so easy. So sometimes you see like, okay, well, for instance, Korea 15 years ago invested everything into design, and that requires also an entirely different shift in thinking. Like, how do you think critically as a society? So I don't have a silver bullet, so to speak, for how to improve visual identity. But starting with creating good benchmarks and investing in it from different stakeholders like universities, young talent, clients who are willing and able. Also investing sometimes in scientific research that shows that high quality design actually creates a better ROI. It can be really helpful if you kind of follow the playbook of how they've done it in the Netherlands, for instance. And I think, again, to the point of like this kind of Silicon Valley look and feel going across the globe, just investing in local creatives and giving them an opportunity to do their best work is really important, and allowing them to develop their talents, not just by copying what's already out there, but developing their own signature, I think is quite important. Do you want me to wait for translation or on the answers too?
جميل. تجاوب على كل الأسئلة وبعدين
Yes, I prefer إنه نمشي بالأسئلة. إحنا ضايل معنا 3 دقايق، مش عارف إذا رح ألحق حتى أترجم صراحة.
Okay. No, answer all, and then we'll see if we have time to translate rather than
translate,
not answer. Yeah.
Sure. So to the question of can I specialize in visual identity, that really depends on, I guess, the situation of the place where you live. So for instance, in Europe and North America, and certain countries in South America too, and in Asia, there are agencies that specialize in visual identity. There's in the Netherlands, they say if you swing a cat, you hit 20 brand designers. So there's no lack of people specializing in it. Actually, I think you should be specialized in it, because I don't see how you could be truly, truly good at it without only doing that. And if I can just leapfrog over one question to tie in the question of like, how can I convince a client to do a whole brand strategy coming from the perspective of a designer? That's very tough. So I started as a designer, grew into a strategist along the way. And what I've found to be very helpful is for clients to understand that the most effective process is actually achieved by really having a clear understanding of who they are and what they do and why that matters, of their audience and who those people are and what they do and why that matters. And you as a creative understanding that will make the creative process much more effective. So we actually use the brand thinking canvas in a lot of cases as a way to create a briefing for the creative work that follows. And that I think is helpful for both the client as well as the creative. And it allows you to say, okay, well, we'll do these workshops. So you don't have to worry that we'll do like a 9-month strategic process. You all come, you bring your brain, we work together on this, it'll be fun. It'll be, for instance, 2 sessions of 3 hours. And that allows you to build those hours and get paid for them, because I think in a lot of cases, the most important work, the strategy, never gets paid. Yeah, as a result, I think you'll be better briefed as a creative, and the client will be happy too, because they have this strong framework that they can now work from. How much is the brand influenced by society's values or ideology? Well, I would assume that it's greatly influenced by it. I love that question. It's so it speaks to such thoughtfulness. So we tend to believe that a good brand is built on a strong insight, like an insight into what's a problem right now that many of us are facing, what needs to be done about it, and then how can we actually, create a brand. So that comes from local ideas of what type of problems people are facing. And then when you start to build the brand strategy and you really think about, for instance, like, okay, well, if we've defined a certain purpose, how do we translate that to the outside world? that really is, if we translate to identity, that is very dependent on, for instance, when we think about professionalism, what professionalism looks like in Kenya is something different than in Iceland. Or what transparency means in Jordan might be an entirely different thing than transparency in the Netherlands. And we need those kind of local touches, because that's the glasses through which people will look at something and get clues on the outside. And that's with a host of things. So that can be tone of voice, it can be color, it can be photography. So for instance, one of the brands I showed in the slideshow, Oatly, is a plant-based milk alternative. Oatly has a very challenging, very in-your-face tone of voice that I don't think would work very well in certain countries where there's a lot more hierarchy and where people are used to communicating much more from a point of respect. So cultural differences, I think, are really important, and a lot of the strongest brands that we know have been able to adapt to those local differences really well. If you think about a company like Unilever, in the way that they've made people believe that their products are actually local products is quite impressive. I hope that answers that question. So Fawaz, so the framework of creating an identity, will there be a version 2? So yes, I think the book is constantly in evolution, because building brands is undergoing evolution, and so I would love to create a version 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. However, also to the comment of Jamal about the toolkit, can we have a personal branding toolkit, an organizational branding toolkit? All of these things depend on my publishers and whether or not they think the book is selling enough to actually merit a second or third or fourth or fifth edition. So each edition is, I think, 3,000 copies. So yeah, I need to provide a lot of data. So if you're excited about this and want to do a little cheerleading effort on my behalf to the publishers, I'd be very grateful. And then I think we had one question from Zainab about what are the characteristics that companies compete on, that Reem already addressed, but I just wanted to mention, so the resources that you requested, Zainab. So we have a community called Brand the Change. You're very much invited to join on brandthechange.org. That's where we have lots of resources, book tips, short videos, all kinds of information about building stronger brands. Yeah, that's definitely like a global think tank for resources. So if you're ever looking for anything, feel free to look there. And then I wanted to leave actually the last question for you, Reem, which was about the social impact. How it can
social
be achieved.
impact when I'm for profit. I just want to, because I know I think Fatma is the one, or someone else, the person that asked. I just want to be able to translate very quickly, especially because I think we have quite a few people who come from a design or graphic design experience, etc., and they want to be able to utilize that book for their work. اللي اقترحته آن إنه البراندينج كانفاس تستخدم بورشة عمل مع الزبون كنوع من الكرياتيف بريفنج عشان تقدروا تصمموا منه اللوجو. فهيك ما بتقولوا له أنا بدي أقعد 6 أشهر أعمل لك كونسلتينج أو 6 أشهر أعمل استشارات لنطلع باستراتيجية للبراند. بتشتغلوا بتعملوا ورشة عمل أو ورشتين عمل كل واحدة ساعتين، بتطلبوا إنه بتكون جماعية وبنفس الوقت بتقدروا تستخدموها كبريفنج لللوجو. So I just answered that. For the social impact when I am for profit, I wasn't sure if the question was how do I communicate it or how do I design it. So how do I do it? You start by designing it. Like, what's the social impact that you're trying to create? How can you create it? You're working with stakeholders. What's the change that you can create for them? It could be also internal stakeholders. So it could be the social impact that I'm creating for my own employees, but also for my clients, for my partners, for my suppliers. And you need to design it very intentionally. And it should be part, I would say the very first step. This is why I love Anne's book. if your company's core and the values are about impact, then it's easily then reflected in your operations, in your products, in your communication. So now I'll say it in Arabic. My advice أو أنا اللي بقترحه لما يكون بدي أعمل أثر وأكون ربحي أو غير ربحي ما بيفرق. اللي بيفرق إنه بالأول شو النواة تبعت المؤسسة تبعتك، شو التغيير اللي أنت حابب تعمله، وطبعا التغيير على مستوى كل الشركاء من الموظفين للشركاء للزباين اللي بتشتغل معهم. لما بيكون كتير واضح شو النواة وشو الرؤية وشو القيم تبعتنا، بعدين بيصير فكرة إنه كيف هذا ينعكس على مستوى البلاتفورم أو المنتج أو الخدمة اللي عم بقدمها، ولا على مستوى التواصل، ولا على مستوى القصة اللي بدي أحكيها. كان جزء من اللي سألته كان الستوري. فالأساس تبعتها إنه زي ما آن ورجتنا إنه نبلش بالنواة وبالقيم وبالرؤية تبعت المؤسسة، عشان نقدر نفكر إنه عشان هذا التغيير، عشان أحدث هذا التغيير يكون واضح عندي شو التغيير اللي بدي أحاول أعمله، عشان بعدين أقدر أعكسه على كل المستويات بالمؤسسة. So to start with the core and then reflect.
Well, I think well done. Thank you, Reem. Thank you, Anne, so much.
Thank
That was
you.
very informative, very interesting, and also entertaining actually. شكرا لحضورنا. يعني هون خلصت المحاضرة. بتمنى تكونوا استفدتوا، بتمنى انه كانت مثرية للجميع. انا عن نفسي استفدت من خبرات آن وريم، وكمان حطينا رابط لكم موجود فيه كيف تشتري الكتاب، وكمان في الكوميونتي اوف ديزاينرز برضه آن حطت اللينك تبعها، تقدروا تو جوين ات وتنضموا لها وتنضموا للمجموعه والمجتمع تبع المغيرين الاجتماعيين. بتمنى تغيروا في المجتمعات، وبتمنى انه تقرأوا الكتاب وتستفيدوا منه بأكبر قدر ممكن. شكرا لكم.
شكرا.
Shukran, everyone. So nice to meet you. Hope to have other moments to interact. And thank you, Reem, for making time for this. Thank you, Jabal Aman, for making the time and giving me this amazing platform. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good. Have a lovely
Thank you, Jamil.
شكرا.